Here's a neat recipe you can try at home. Take 1 cup of action, 2 teaspoons of pixel art, stir in an ambient soundtrack, and bake for 3 years. What you'll end up with is Hyperlight Drifter, another crowdfunded dream project by the guys over at Whatthefnu. However, despite the rather incredible cash it amassed, this is still a game releasing during one of the busiest periods of the year, surrounded by some high-profile contenders. Does this title have what it takes to be worth your time regardless? Let's take a closer look and find out. I really couldn't tell you what the story of Hyperlight Drifter is, and it's not because there isn't one. You're constantly reminded of it, of the giants that used to walk the land and the effect they had on the smaller folk. There are shadowy beings that haunt your travels and show you disturbing visions of what brought you here in the first place. There's clearly something going on here, but for me, it never amounted to anything. I think most of that was due to a lack of communication. If you don't count the tutorials, Hyperlight Drifter is entirely free of dialogue. Everything you learn about this world you either experience firsthand or see with your own eyes. And that can be an incredibly powerful narrative tool, but if the imagery isn't clear enough or say what it needs to, it can also leave the player confused and lacking motivation. That's what happened to me. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of build-up here. The atmosphere is so thick in this game that it made me utterly ravenous for lore. Constantly I felt the need to press on, that if I put in enough effort, someday I could understand the mysteries that were being presented to me. And maybe I'm just oblivious, but I never experienced that payoff. There was no grand reveal or satisfying aha moment where suddenly everything clicked, even at the end. This leaves Hyperlight Drifter in a weird position for me, where I think it has a fantastic world, but a really bad story. It didn't just leave me with far more questions than answers, it practically drowned the brief bits of insight in a total blanketing obscurity. And I'm not gonna lie, considering how much effort I had to exert to get to that point, that left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah, let's talk about the gameplay in Drifter. This is an action game at heart, but one designed in a way to actively discourage button mashing. Attacks have a bit of a recovery time before you can start moving again, and while you have a firearm, its clip is very small and can only be recharged by landing attacks with your sword. Invincibility frames are also practically non-existent. Enemies and environmental hazards have the potential to waste through your entire life bar in a matter of seconds, which they will do if you're either not paying attention or are just incredibly unfortunate. Make no mistake, this combat is hard. It's not as punishing as something like Bloodborne, but it does want to make sure that every action you perform is deliberate. But I'm fine with that, yeah? I like consistency in mechanics. If action A will always result in outcome A during this particular situation, then I'm happy. Where I think Drifter takes it a step too far is how most of its difficulty seems to come from overwhelming you rather than making you approach individual challenges with care and tact. Sometimes it feels like enemies just never stop coming, and in the midst of dodging about 7 or 8 different attack patterns at once, just to fight back, you also have to watch your ammo count, keep track of your stamina bar, and make sure your health stays high. It always seems like there's an unreasonable number of variables here that I always have to be watching, so later on, even after it felt like I had mastered the mechanics, I was still dying every now and again. And it rarely felt like it was my fault. I'd open the map to a new area, notice how big it was, and sigh in exasperation, knowing how many enemies that meant I'd have to fight. And in a game that's mostly combat, I can't imagine that's the reaction Heart Machine was going for. Speaking of the maps, the first couple challenges in this game are presented in an open-ended style. With the exception of one, you can tackle any of the major maps in any order you like, even unlocking warp points along the way in case you want to fast travel somewhere else. That doesn't necessarily mean you should tackle them in any order, though. Your reward for conquering the northern area is a sniper rifle that's absolutely necessary for obtaining certain secrets or hidden items, and in the east, you get the shotgun, which is so incredibly powerful at close range that suddenly the game feels fair again. It makes combat so much more manageable in most situations that using this weapon feels like the way the game was meant to be played. Not to mention the boss that guards it is by far the easiest of the initial 3. Considering all the secrets I missed while not having the rifle, and how much more fun I was having using the shotgun, it made me wonder why the game even gave me an option in the first place. Same thing with the purchasable upgrades. Let's be clear about this. If you don't buy the multi-dash power-up early on, you are straight fubbernucked. Most of the bosses and some of the trickier secrets are practically impossible without this ability. And you know what's the worst part? It doesn't even always work. Some of these challenges will ask you to dash continuously over a disappearing path or a minefield of traps, where if you slow down for even a second, you die. Yet sometimes I felt my inputs getting eaten and saw myself crashing into a wall far more often than felt necessary or accurate. And here's the thing, there are plenty of upgrades in this game, but none of them increase your maximum life. Instead, they increase the number of healing items you can carry at once, meaning the difficulty on display here for every single hurdle was highly intentional. They clearly tried to design all this to be manageable with this tiny little health bar, and yet, I never felt like it was. It always felt like I was succeeding in spite of the game and not because I was actually getting better at it. Because let's be real here, I got good about one level before I got the shotgun. And even after I got it, I was still dying for reasons that felt beyond my control. You tell me what that says about the balance. At least the music is top-notch. Like I said, this game lays the ambience on thick. Most tracks are quiet and controlled, complementing the natural beauty of the environments very well. The soundtrack helps sell the serenity of a lush forest or a waterlogged temple quite nicely, and it proves to be a nice counterpoint to the crushing difficulty. It's not really about the destination here in that sense. It's about all the sights you see and the people you meet along the way. It's like a Paper Mario game, where the self-contained stories of the individual chapters are often far more interesting than the central plot that ties them together. But because I got to see so little of them before I was herded off to hunt more modules, it wasn't quite enough, even if it all sounded beautiful. If you couldn't tell, I'm very conflicted on Hyper Light Drifter. It's not just the difficulty that reminds me of Dark Souls in that sense. This is a very polished game, a very well thought out game. In fact, save for the inconsistent dashing, nothing in this game feels like it wasn't done on purpose. Theoretically, that means I should like it, but I don't. The design seems to think it's always very clear in telling you what it wants from your performance, that it's always got you hooked on its vague narrative, and that you always have all the information you need. But I didn't. I didn't walk away from this game feeling like I had accomplished something or gone on a worthwhile journey. At best, I was being led along by beautiful story snippets that I had hoped would reach an interesting conclusion eventually. At worst, I was bashing a sledgehammer against a brick wall that defied all laws of durability, leaving me waiting until it felt like crumbling. At best, I felt like a badass, clearing a room of 20 or so enemies without taking a single hit. And at worst, I was stumbling around lost and unsure what to do next because I was never told which collectibles or actions actually did what. So my final word is, if you like Dark Souls, you're probably going to like this. I don't like Dark Souls, and that probably explains why I have the position on this game that I do.